Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show that talks about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I hope you'll join me as I chat to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. In this podcast, we look at topics such as near-death experiences, after-death communication, deathbed moments, and all kinds of spiritually transformative experiences. I also love to hear your first-hand accounts, so feel free to reach out via www.letstalkneardeath.com.
And he said, you need to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm a businesswoman. People will think I'm nuts. 90% of people at the end of their life, Kirsty, report seeing their deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets, either in visions or dreams. About midway through, there are two additional angels that show up on either side of what I call the spirit bubble.
Hello, and welcome back to season 13 of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of your show. And I'll tell you what, I'm really excited about our conversation today. This one's been brewing in me for some time. We're talking about the topic of deathbed moments, of end-of-life experiences in the season. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. Her name is Julie Ryan. She's an entrepreneur, a psychic, and a medical intuitive. And Julie shares her spiritual insight into the dying process. It's going to be so fascinating. She talks about a process which involves angels, deceased relatives, friends, and even pets, in what she describes as the 12 phases of transition. Julie's the author of 3 books, including this beautiful book here, which is called Angelic, Attendants: What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next. And I'm really looking forward to hearing her understanding into the spiritual side of death. So Julie Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Oh my goodness, what an honor and a privilege and a delight to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. I can feel this one. Like I said, it's been brewing for a while. So you wrote this beautiful book, Angelic Attendants. If you're on the video version, you can see that. It's acting like a mirror, so I've got to work out which way to turn it. This book I stumbled across in my research into the spiritual side of death. I think I was listening to something and I went to something else. And anyway, I ended up following this little breadcrumb and got to your book. And it was fascinating, all about what happens spiritually in those moments of death. So we have so much we could talk about. I know you're a medical intuitive as well, that you see illness, you feel illness within the body. There's a lot of spiritual stuff going on for you in your work. But let's focus in on these 12 phases of transition. How did this happen? How did you get to writing about that? And how did you receive this information?
Well, first of all, I'm a businesswoman and an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world. And so I tell people that I'm a businesswoman who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness. So,
oh, wow. How does that go down?
Well, exactly. I learned how to do all this stuff, Kirsty. That's the big thing. I laugh and I say I'm not a psychic who's had dead people chasing her since childhood, or if I did, I didn't know it, let alone what I would have done with that information. And so I learned how to raise my vibrational level. And as you mentioned, I do medical, intuitive, and energetic healings. I'm like a human MRI. I can see broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections. I worked with 2 clients this morning who both have cancer. We did DNA healings. We did all this other stuff. So I get to see all of these things in my mind's eye. And I think that's why I was in the medical industry on the supply side for all those decades. So when I'm watching these healings happen, some of them emulate what I saw in operations, in surgery. And I always think, okay, this is why I know what I'm watching, because I had all that experience designing products and things for that. So I can do that. We can talk to deceased loved ones, both people and pets. We can talk to any spirit connected to a body, to somebody who's alive. Doesn't have to be somebody who's dead. Doesn't have to be somebody you knew. Who do you want to talk to? Moses, Napoleon, whomever. It doesn't matter. We just connect with them. I can tell how close to death somebody is. That's what my book's about. And what else? Talk to spirit guides, talk to angels, do past lives. Those are really fun. So how this all came about was when I was about 30 years ago, I had a friend give me a book called Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn May.
Yes, a very
You
good
read
book. I've got that. It's in my bag beside my desk.
Yes.
Another great book.
And I read it, and she referred to herself as a medical intuitive. And I'd never heard that term before. And I thought, what the heck is that? And I went to the bookstore back then, Kirsty, because we didn't have the internet yet.
Yeah.
And I went to a bookstore to see what else was there. And I found a book called Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan, who was a former NASA physicist. She was a rocket scientist, literally, who parlayed very complex quantum physics information into understandable English. And really, my first exposure to all of this was on the Oprah Winfrey show, on the Oprah show, when two people, first of all, Shirley MacLaine was talking about spirits and communicating with spirits, the actress. And then they had a little boy on there who was 3, I believe, and he was talking about past lives. And he had all this very specific information that they were able to corroborate with historic documents. So that was probably my first exposure to it as an adult. So then I read both those books, and I called Barbara Brennan's school. And I said, do you have anybody teaching this stuff in my area? So it was really the medical stuff that led me to this journey all those decades ago. And then what's come out of it is what I'm doing now. I'm an entrepreneur. I have founded 9 companies in 5 industries.
Wow.
And sold my surgical device manufacturing company a number of years ago and thought, okay, what am I going to do now? And then I was led to write the book, and then it's developed into a podcast and a syndicated radio show, and I work with clients and I teach classes. And so it's really developed into my full-time occupation now, and it's a blast. It's so much fun.
Oh my goodness, there's so much in there, isn't there? There's so many different things that you do, and it does sound like a lot of fun. The 12 phases of transition. I mean, I've read the book. Are you happy to share some of those with us?
Sure.
Are you happy to explain? My big question, I guess, is how did you know what they were? If you explain a bit about what they are and then how you knew what each phase was,
okay,
it might make a little bit more sense for the listener, because I'm jumping ahead there.
Okay. Well, let me back up even a step before that. How the book originated was one day I was with my mentor and teacher, and she was doing a healing on me. I zap on people all over the world. She's the only one that does healings on me. And when I'm getting a healing done on me, I'm on a massage table, and my deceased loved one's spirits are on either side of the table. My parents, my grandmother, my late sister, all these people, spirits. And one day this dead pope showed up, the spirit of a dead pope. He had his whole pope outfit on, Kirsty, and I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And I said to him, and Susan could see him, my mentor, and I said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm Clement. And I said, there was a Pope Clement? I never heard of a Pope Clement. He said, yeah, I was number 6. I said, okay. Basically, can I help you? Why are you here?
Yeah.
What can I do for you? And he said, you need to teach the world what happens when somebody dies. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm a businesswoman. People will think I'm nuts. And he said, yeah, just do it anyway. And so he went on to say, everything you've done in your life is to prepare you for what's coming. And this is what's coming. You need to teach the world. Fast forward, I leave Susan's office. I'm in the car. Just for kicks, I did an internet search on Pope Clement VI. Well, come to find out, Kirsty, he was in office during the Black Plague when 2/3 of Europe died. And he's best known for his prayers for the dying and his prayers for the dead. And I thought, you can't make that up. I couldn't make that up. I never heard of the guy, let alone he's there telling me I'm supposed to teach the world. So that's how all this came about with the angelic attendants. And then what happened was when my mother was dying in 2002, I was with her. I was only with her for about the last 24 hours of her life because at the time, she lived about 9 hours from my family and me. So we got in the car and we drove all night to be with her. And my other family members had come in from out of town and were also there. And when we were with her, Kirsty, I started seeing angels. I started seeing the spirits of deceased loved ones that I recognized. Some I didn't. And I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. And as the day progressed into night, more and more things were happening. And then I was with her when she passed. I was the only one with her when she passed because it was 5 a.m. And I said to her, everybody's on the way. If you can hold on, do. If you can't, it's okay. I'm here. And she left about 10 minutes before the rest of the family arrived. So at her funeral, of course, my head was spinning because I'd learned how to see spirit. I'd learned how to communicate with spirit. But this was a whole new chapter of what happened when somebody was dying. And I find, Kirsty, that there are a lot of books and there's a lot of information on what happens in the afterlife, how to grieve, near-death experiences, but not so much about what happens when somebody's dying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's what Pope Clement was talking about, was you need to teach people what happens, because he said to me when he showed up that first day, he said, this has been so bastardized. And people are so afraid to die. They don't know if they're going to fly or if they're going to fry. And so you need to teach people what happens. Since that time, the books happened, all of that, but there's been university-based research that validates and corroborates what I see spiritually in my mind's eye, with 90% of people at the end of their life, Kirsty, report seeing their deceased loved ones and the spirits of deceased pets, either in visions or dreams. And so I always say, I love it when science catches up with woo-woo, because woo-woo's been around forever. 12 phases of transition. That was a very long, convoluted answer. But to answer your initial question, what are the 12 phases of transition? They are a series of events that we all go through as we're transitioning, as we're dying. And it's deceased loved ones, angels, pets, spirits, and other phenomena that occur regardless of if somebody dies instantly, like in the case of a homicide or suicide, or if they die over a prolonged period of time, like days, weeks, months, years even. And anybody that wants to see graphics of this, if you go to askjulieryan.com, my website, and go to the 12 phases of transition, there are graphics on there about how the angels and the deceased loved ones and the pets and the animal spirits are positioned.
So interesting that they have their set places, don't they? That where they show up. And is that consistent that they always show up in those places every death?
That's how they show up to me. I think it's important to remember that, number one, time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time is a human creation, our linear time. It's a human creation. And number two, they're going to show up in a way that we can understand it based on our frame of reference. For instance, I went through 12 years of Catholic school. So I, as a little child, in a Catholic family, was taught this is how angels look: big wings, white gown, halo over their head. I don't see so many halos, but I see a lot of wings and gowns and all of that. Is that how angels really look? Well, that's how they're depicted in the statuary and the paintings and the illustrations that I've been exposed to in my lifetime. But perhaps somebody who grew up in an indigenous culture would see angel energy as just a blob of purple energy. So Spirit's going to communicate to us in a way that it's going to make the most sense to us. I find that is very much the case too when I'm working with somebody on a medical issue, which is the majority of stuff that I do, because that's what people ask for. People have a medical condition. And I was talking to a client a couple of days ago who's a professional chef. So I was getting visions in my head of healings for which we don't have a frame of reference for these energetic healings. But I was getting images to explain to my client in a way that a chef would understand. Like I was getting analogies of different dishes and different ways to fix dishes and things like that. And I'm not a cook. I mean, I cook, but I'm not a chef by any means. So it was interesting. I was describing something looking like creme brulee, like the crust of the sugar, the caramelized sugar on the top of a creme brulee. It's fascinating how spirit communicates things in a way that we can understand them. And it's an analogy for something for which we don't have a frame of reference in a lot of cases.
Wow, it's interesting. I know like you said, there isn't a whole lot of research out there around those moments of death about what happens. And you're saying up to 90% of people have either dreams or they have visions, they experience loved ones who have passed. Why do you think it is that there isn't much research out there? Is it because it's quite hard to define it, to prove it, to say this is exactly what happens?
Yes, I do think that's the case. I also believe that it's been around since the beginning of time. And when I was writing Angelic Attendants, I did some research to find out where did a prayer called In Paradisum, a prayer said at the end of every Roman Catholic funeral, that in Latin, In Paradisum means into paradise. Mm-hmm. And in that prayer, Kirsty, it talks about that our loved ones will greet us and lead us into paradise. And so when I was researching that, I found that it originated as a 5th century Gregorian chant. I have to believe that maybe it took till the 5th century till somebody was well educated enough that they could write this down in the form of a chant or a prayer. And certainly back then, some of the most well-educated people were men living in monasteries and synagogues. They're the keepers of the records. That's where archaeologists go to find records on ancient civilizations and other things. Fast forward in the past 150 years, where more of the population has become literate, we've become more proof-based, become more science-based. We want proof that something exists before we believe it. Whereas I think people of all cultures believe things because that's what they were taught. Now, those of us that are more well-educated, especially in the Western world, we say, okay, well, show us some proof. Well, now there's proof. There's university-based research, as I alluded to earlier. The other thing that I find interesting is that throughout all religious texts, regardless of the religion or the culture, in all kinds of literature, spirits are depicted, angels are depicted, what happens at the time of death is depicted, how the spirit separates from the body. All of that is depicted, but it's just been until recently, I would say in the last 100 years, where research has been done, and rigorous research really just in the past 10 years to corroborate what I think people have been able to see since the beginning of time.
It's so interesting because we can't physically prove it, and yet so many people are having the same experiences. They're saying the same things. There's themes that, working with hospice people, they can start to identify when someone's close to death.
Oh,
based
absolutely.
on what's happening and, the way that the body's responding to things, but also the conversations. They're talking about packing for a trip, or they're looking for their passport or for their travel bag or their shoes or something like this. I mean, this isn't something that's hard to use as proof, but it is now because there's so many accounts of it. It's proof within itself. So it's just amazing how that all happens. What do you think happens in that moment of death? How do you think, like we see pictures, does the spirit come up out of the body? Does it come through the chest, through the head? How do you think the spirit actually leaves the body in that moment of death?
From my perspective, it leaves the body through the top of the head. It would be referred to as the 7th chakra, which is the spiritual chakra, the energy center that connects us to spirit. And I don't talk about chakras much, but to those who understand that, That would be the top of the head. And it holds on to the top of the head as the person is dying. And what happens is it looks like a cartoon caption bubble, Kirsty, or like a speech bubble that you'd see in a cartoon with the characters' words or thoughts in it. And that's phase one of the 12 phases of transition. The next thing that happens is the closest maternal spirit shows up. So if the dying person's mother is deceased, it'll be her. If she's still alive, it will be her mother. If the grandmother's still alive, it will be the maternal grandmother's mother, the maternal great-grandmother, always on the maternal line. And that's the spirit that comes in first. And they run the show from the spirit world. It's wild. That surprised me. And again, the first time I saw it was when my mother was dying. And my maternal grandmother, my Meemaw, we called her Meemaw. My Meemaw had died 6 months prior. And I was her favorite. All the grandchildren will tell you that. I'm named for her. I was her favorite. And she didn't so much look at me when she was in the room. She could have cared less about any of us that were in the room, all her grandchildren, my mother, but she was focused on my mother. My dad, she didn't pay attention to anybody. She was running the show. She brought the angels in. She brought my grandfather's spirit in. She brought the other spirits in. So the mother's spirit shows up first, the maternal, paternal shows up next. Then there's a circle of angels that forms with the parents anchoring at the foot of the bed of the person who's dying. I'm using this as an illustration. These 12 phases can happen in less than a nanosecond. Like I mentioned, if somebody dies suddenly. And then as the person gets closer to death, that circle of angels starts to open up, Kirsty, into a horseshoe, and then eventually a straight line across the bottom of the foot of the bed, really. And it's funny because the angels end up acting as crowd control. I say they're angelic crowd control because there are so many other spirits that come in from many, many, many lifetimes dressed in period attire, which is a riot to see. It's so fun to see. And then that's where the spirit of the animals, the pets are as well. So I can always tell if somebody grew up on a farm or perhaps lives on a farm now, because oftentimes in that situation, there are farm animals there. There are horses and chicks and ducks and pigs and cows. Like, oh my God. So it's really fun. Wow. And I can describe what the animals look like to the family. And they can say, oh, that's Fluffy or Poodle, or that's Ranger or Black Lab or whatever. That's Trigger or Horse. Yeah. And it's fascinating.
Wow, that really is. I think the question that jumps to mind is, what if you didn't have any pets? If you didn't particularly like animals, would they come in from past lives? Are you talking about crowd control? Would some come anyway?
I don't see animals from past lives. I see animal spirits from this lifetime, but I see spirits of people who lived in past lives. So I'll see people that are dressed in different period attire, the Renaissance, cavemen people. The 60s are fun with go-go boots and mini skirts on, like the Twiggy era. People like that. And it was fascinating with my mother when she was dying, because I was seeing spirits of people who were there to what I call it the Welcome to Heaven committee. And they were there. And some of them I hadn't thought of in 25 years. They had died 25 years earlier. And I heard about it when they passed, but I hadn't thought of them since. And they showed up looking like what they looked like when I knew them, when they were alive. So again, that spirit's going to show up. So then all the pets start showing up. More and more spirits show up as the person's getting closer to death. About midway through, Kirsty, there are 2 additional angels that show up on either side of what I call the spirit bubble. That's again attached to the top of the head. And in about phase 9, their wings start to move.
Wow.
And I saw that with my mother, and I thought, that's going to be interesting. At first I thought, am I imagining this? And then it continued, and I thought, all right. And what I learned was that slow rhythmic movement. Think giant owl. Owls are silent when they fly, but their wingspan is so great that you can almost feel the drag that they're creating as they fly. So these angels' wings were moving, and it was creating a vortex above my mother's spirit bubble, above her head, like imagine a tornado or a funnel cloud spinning. And I could feel it, and I could hear it, and I could see it. And I thought, all right, this must be how it's going to help separate the body from the spirit. And as the night progressed into the wee hours of the morning, that movement was just slow and rhythmic, and it continued to happen. And that's exactly what happened, is that's how the spirit evacuates from the body, out through the top of the head, through this vortex. And once it's through the vortex, then the angels are on either side, and they're escorting the person to heaven. Interesting point, an analogy that I use to kind of make sense of how this is all put together is, we've all heard we're spirits connected to a body having a human experience.
Yeah.
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 My perception of it is that the body is inside the spirit. I was raised in Catholic school as a little child to believe that the spirit is someplace in the chest area. That's not what I perceive. What I perceive is the spirit's the main part of us, our aura, our energy field. You know, if somebody's getting an EEG or an EKG, what are they doing? They're measuring the frequency outside of the body. They're measuring the energy field. Yeah. And so the body is inside the spirit, and it's all holographic. My example that I like to use as an analogy is, think about going to the pet store and buying a goldfish. They're going to put it in a plastic bag of water in order for you to get it home. So if you have a picture of that in your mind's eye, the fish represents our body, the water represents our spirit because the body's inside the spirit, and the plastic bag represents our energy field membrane, or the container that holds everything together, and then it's all holographic. And then if somebody has a medical condition, there's always some emotional event that's at play. And what happens is emotional events cause energy blocks, a la Eastern medicine, acupressure, acupuncture, clear the block, get the chi to move, that whole concept. Yeah. And energy blocks cause pressure, which causes a rupture in this membrane. So back to the fish in a bag example, if you're looking at that and that plastic bag has a pinhole in it and water's draining out a drop at a time, for a long time, that fish is going to be fine. However, when enough water drains out, that fish is going to be in trouble. That's what happens to the human body over time, because the spirit, the energy of the spirit is the power source for the body. So if the body's draining energy, then it's not going to work properly. Furthermore, when the body and the spirit separate, the spirit's the everlasting part. The body doesn't work once the spirit leaves, because what happens? It doesn't have a power source anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And my mind's a bit blown, because you talked about how we're the spirit, we're in our chest, and that resonates for me. Then we talk about auras, and I've always just felt like I was too big for my body. And that's where the energy doesn't fit into this body. And you hear, especially with near-death experiences, we talk about how we were massive when we're outside the body, and then we're trying to fit back into this human vessel and squishing in there. And it's like, well, there's just a bit of overflow, which was the aura, the energy, and you can feel people's energy. We don't fit in our bodies. So the way that you've described it makes total sense to me. That's blowing my mind. I think my question is, how do we preserve the membrane? How do we stop that plastic bag from getting the little pinhole leaks? And is that through meditation? Is that through rebalancing? Is that the goal, is to try to preserve, I'm going to say the plastic bag for the sake of it, but it's that outer membrane, that spiritual membrane. I'm not sure if I'm making sense now, but
no, you are. Yeah, you are. Well, that's the most important part of a healing session that I do with a client, And people call into my show from all over the world every Thursday night, America time, and they ask questions. And I don't have time to work on the energy field membrane on my show because I'm trying to get as many people on as I can and get their questions answered. But when I have a private client and I have an hour with them, that's the most important part of a healing, because we can fix body parts all day long. But if you got a power leak, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like your car's not working and you take it to the mechanic and they put in a new radiator. Okay, fine, but you got a dead battery. Why bother putting in the radiator? The car's still not going to run because you got a dead battery. So what we do, what I do, and what I teach is we look for what was the emotional event that triggered the energy block. Unlike psychotherapy, where they say, now, Kirsty, we're going to talk about your life, and it'll be like peeling an onion a layer at a time.
Yeah.
I'm going for where's the root of the onion? Let's get it out by the root, because then that gets all of the energy blocks out in one fell swoop. Certainly, there's always application for psychotherapy. It makes tons of sense. But for my work, I'm going for where did that originate? And it either originates as an event in this lifetime or an event in a past life that we've brought through the energy because we want to continue to explore whatever the topic is. And again, a client this morning who grew up in Ireland, living in California now, I was talking with him. We were doing the energy field membrane healing at the end of our session. I always usually save it till last, unless I'm led by spirit to do it first. And I think the year was 1963, and he was 10 years old. And I said, there was something that was going on, and you were being held back. And I saw this was an analogy. I saw you on a bicycle riding down a road, and there was a flock of sheep that were blocking the road and you couldn't get through. Well, he grew up in a city, so that didn't make sense. I said, this is an analogy for something. What was it that you were held back on? He said, I was held back at grade school.
Oh, okay.
When he was 10 years old. So that was where, and he was embarrassed. He was mortified because all of his friends were advancing to the next grade. That's a great example of that energy block forming there. And it reminds me of a little kernel of unpopped popcorn gets stuck in the energy field, then other life events, Kirsty, pile, the energy, the emotional energy piles on top of it, eventually causing enough pressure causes a blowout in the energy field membrane. So as soon as we illuminate it, it eradicates it. It's like if you walk into a pitch black room, a dark room for the first time, it might feel kind of creepy because you've never been in there and you don't know what's in there. If not, hopefully nobody's in there, who's in there. And as soon as you flip on the light switch, you realize, well, there's nothing in here that can hurt me. So what do? You illuminate it, so you eradicate the fear. Same with this. We illuminate, where did that energy block begin? We eradicate it, and then the body can work on full power. It's really fascinating to see.
That really is. And I think that concept comes into life. I'm always saying, let's find the things we're afraid of. And exactly that, put the light on it. Let's understand why we're afraid. And I'm a little bit different that sometimes I pursue things that I'm afraid of. If I'm scared of something, I'm like, I'm going to go and do it because I'm scared of it, because I don't want that fear. I don't want to be held back. And exactly that, putting the light on, I think that can go right across our whole life. You know, it's not just necessarily a spiritual practice. It's an everyday practice, which I really, really love. I want to come back. You talked about how in these phases of transition, when somebody is actively dying in these final moments, these things happen where the spirits come in, the past loved ones, maternal, paternal, the pets. You talked about the speech bubble above the head, and then the vortex. So the angel wings start to create the vortex. And have I understood correctly that happens right before the spirit leaves the body, the vortex?
It happens about phase 9, where the vortex starts to form. And then the phase 12 is, see, I'm heading to heaven. You know, that's when the spirit, everybody goes to heaven. There was a movie out many years ago called All Dogs Go to Heaven. Well, all people go to heaven as well. I think that's important to remember. And yes, so the vortex starts to form about phase 9. And then by phase 12, the spirit is exiting through the vortex to get out. And it reminds me, it's so funny, Kirsty, it reminds me of going through the car wash when you stay in the car. At the end of the car wash, and they turn on the dryers and it's sucking all that water off your car. That's what that's what it feels like. It's just it's like a vacuum. I can see it, I can feel it, I can hear it. That somebody goes through. And I think that's the tunnel that you hear about so much in your work with the NDE.
Yeah, could be. The tunnel and the light, and exactly. There's a few ideas around what the tunnel might be, and I love it when I hear new ones. Yep, definitely could be, I think. I'm curious to know, is there within the phases, in the work that I do, I've read and heard about people transitioning back and forth. So they're in their body, but then they're in a heavenly realm, then they're back in their body and going back and forth. And from what you've said, I would expect that would kind of happen around that time where the vortex is starting to happen, where the angels are there with the wings. Is that something that you think happens, that we can go between two worlds? It's more of a transition than a sudden moment of death?
Two answers to that question. Number one, yes, people can go in and out of the phases at any time, at any phase. People can be at phase 7 and then go back to phase 2, or come completely out of the phases. How we know that somebody's progressing towards death is they're going through the phases in succession at a fairly rapid rate. And we can and we communicate with whoever's dying. There are 3 questions I always ask them. Are you ready to go? Are you in pain? And what do you need? And the answers to what do you need are all across the board. They can be, can you bring me a chocolate bar? Or I need a blanket or a sweater, or I need to see my dog. I just have endless stories about that. I had a guy in Greece who was dying. He was a retired admiral in the Greek Navy, and I was working with his wife via phone. I was talking to her on the phone, and he couldn't communicate. He was unable to verbally communicate anymore, and he was in a coma. And so I asked him what he needed. He said he needed to see his sister. So I said, he needs to see his sister. Is she close by? Can you have her come over? And she said, no, she's in Australia. She lives in Sydney. These people lived in Athens. And I said, well, get her on the Zoom or FaceTime or something like that. And he did, and he died shortly thereafter. That's just one example of many. This needs to be done for my estate. I need you to, I don't know, take care of something with my dog. It's just endless. And it really helps the family figure out what they need to do to help the person go peacefully and comfortably. So there's that. And then the other part is that when we're dying, we're in control. Our spirit decides when we go, where we go, how we go, who's with us, when we go, if anyone. And ask any funeral director. They have unlimited stories about the family sat with grandma for 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden, Aunt Susie, who was on duty, left to go get a cup of tea. And when she was out of the room for 3 minutes, grandma passed. Yeah. So, yes, we are in control. The other thing is we're in and out of our bodies in different realities every night when we sleep. Most of us will do what's called astral travel, where part of our spirit's connected to our body, and then another part of our spirit, we're traveling, God only knows where, which is why sometimes it's hard to figure out, what does this dream mean? Because we've had experiences in a different reality while we've been asleep, and we don't have any frame of reference for it in our human existence. So we're trying to make sense of it, of something that we don't know what it is or where it is. So yeah, we do that all the time. I do it every day when I work. I'm in and out of different realities. When I'm scanning somebody energetically, I can scan anybody anywhere in the world. I could scan you on Mars. If you were on Mars, Kirsty, it doesn't matter. I connect to you energetically. I'm doing remote viewing. I'm like a human MRI or an X-ray. I'm looking at your body.
Wow.
I'm doing that. I'm connecting to you. If you want to talk to a deceased loved one, I can tell you your deceased loved one's standing next to you. Or I'm connecting to your pet. So yeah, we're in and out of different realities all the time. We're just deja vu.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
that is.
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it? It's incredible. I love that you talk about we have the ability to choose. So there's some level of control in death. You're talking about the family who leave the
Complete
room for
control.
3 minutes, and that's the moment. I hear these stories all the time, or waiting for Aunt Susie to get there because just waiting for the family to arrive, and the moment they arrive, it feels different, and then within 10 minutes or so, they slip out. So I think it's
Exactly.
amazing how we have some level of control. It kind of haven't got my head around it because obviously I'm not there, but I love that there does feel like there's an element that we won't miss out, or I don't know, that everything will go to plan. I feel like that's it. Yeah. So
Yes,
in
and
the,
we're in total control with that. May I share an experience that just happened last weekend
oh, absolutely.
along those lines? One of my graduates of my Angelic attendant training, it's very comprehensive. I teach everybody that takes the class how to do all the stuff that I do. And then we have practice sessions for life. We have multiple ones a week. Comes with it. It's free for life. People get together who are graduates of my class. We get together. So I have a graduate who was suffering with brain cancer and lung cancer for years, been through just atrocious pain and procedures and things like that. And it was at the end of her life, and the doctors were saying that she couldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything for her. So she decided to take the Death with Dignity pill. Do you know about that? Where you
Yeah.
end your life, it makes
Yeah.
the heart stop. And here in America, it's approved in 10 states. And you have to go through, is there nothing that can be done for you, or you have sound mind when you make this decision, that kind of thing.
Mm.
So she decided on a Friday night, a week ago today, that she was going to take the pill on Sunday at noon Pacific time. And she asked if some in our angelic attendant training community could come to get together because she wanted to see everybody before she left, before she passed. So with less than 12 hours notice, there were dozens of my graduates and I that got on a Zoom call with her. And it was so remarkable, the love that was there and the compassion and the support and all of that. And I thought, how wonderful that we have had the opportunity with her to give her that kind of a send off. Interestingly enough, Kirsty, she was an animal lover. She was a horse girl, horse lover, had horses, used horses to help heal people. Some horses are therapy horses. And I had written a blog recently about how wild horses, when a horse is dying, the herd will come and they will come up to the horse that's dying one by one, and they call it sharing breath with them. They'll put their nose up close to the horse that's dying and they'll share breath. And it's kind of a living wake, if you will, the old-fashioned word wake, what we would call that maybe visitation. And it was so remarkable because she literally was in control physically too, because she had decided she was going to end her life that way. And the love and the support. And I thought, my goodness, this is how every visitation should be when somebody dies. People should be able to come see the person before they check out. And it was really poignant that that's what wild horses do. And she was so into horses with that. And my point being, all death is a form of suicide. If we decide when we go, where we go, how we go, who's with us when we go or not, we're deciding that. So I work with a lot of people who have a loved one who's committed suicide, a child or a spouse or a parent, and they suffer so much with the grief and the guilt and what if I did this? Could I have stopped it? How could I have helped them? it's our spirit's choice to do that. So really, when you think of that, whether somebody's hit by a bus and dies that way very quickly and instantly, or they have a prolonged illness, or they take the death with dignity pill, it's all the same thing. Our spirit's deciding how we're exiting.
Oh, my head is trying to catch up with that because you said something which really blew my mind, which was every death is a suicide. I understand
Yeah,
what you're saying, that like the evidence is 100% of us will die, 100% of us will leave this world, this body. Are you talking that we've already made that spiritual decision that we will die, and so therefore it was a decision made before we incarnated, and I don't know. Do you think we have any choice around dying?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think when our spirit is ready, we're done. Yes. And back to the every family has a story about their loved one died when they were alone, or they
Mm,
were somebody was missing, or they needed somebody to arrive and then they passed.
mm.
We are in control, which goes against everything we've been taught. We're all
Yeah.
taught, we're all taught, well, I wish God would take him. My mother used to light candles at church, and we laughed and we called them killer candles. She'd say, oh, he's suffering, I'm going to go light a candle. And we'd say, oh God, she's lighting like killer candles again. And invariably the person would die within a few days. I think they were probably going to die anyways, but it was kind of a family joke for us. There goes Nana lighting killer candles again. And
Oh,
it's a different way of thinking, but it makes sense to me when you look at all that information about how people transition and what the circumstances are. And we have so many examples of, it seems like the person really was in control because they were in
yeah.
a coma for a week and they were waiting for somebody to come in from abroad. And as soon as the person
Mm,
got there, to your point earlier, then they're
yeah.
gone within a matter of minutes or hours even.
Yeah. And quite often they wait for permission for the family to say it's okay, you can go now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not that we need permission, but I think I've actually answered my own question as you were just clarifying there, that it's almost like we've made the decision to die, the suicide decision, before we come and have this lifetime.
No, I think that we come in with a basic script of things that we want to explore. And the script is we want to create. And there are a bazillion ways we can create, and that's free will. And there are many stories about people who, for instance, cancer patients that are being treated, and then all of a
Mm,
sudden they don't, it's not like they're feeling terrible. They're not on their deathbed at that point, but the doctor says, well, there isn't anything else we can do for you. And they're dead the next day.
mm,
Or the actress Debbie Reynolds
mm.
is a very famous actress from the golden age of Hollywood, and her daughter Carrie Fisher died. Debbie was healthy. She was in her 80s, I think, but she was healthy. She was still touring. She died the next day. They
Yeah.
were so close. And her family was just flabbergasted because she decided to leave because she didn't want to be without her daughter, we're assuming. But she was fine the night before, and then the next morning they found her dead in her bed.
Yeah. Isn't that
So I think
amazing?
I think we decide, and I think our lives, we choose where we're born, when we're born, to whom we're born, so our lives can have a basic trajectory so that we can explore and experience things that we want to in this lifetime. And when we're done exploring and creating, then we die. And then what do? We go back to heaven and we create something else that we want to come back and explore. That's my
Mm,
take on it.
mm.
So just think about certain exit points, and you have a plan of the day you're going to die, at the hour, at the time. I don't find that to be the case in my experiences with working with thousands of clients over the years.
Mm, mm.
What's
That's
yours?
great.
What's yours?
Oh, look, I was just about to say, I love how we get so many different perspectives and people have different ideas. I had never considered that before we came here. Well, I think this is what's forming for me, that life is suicide, that we always all choose to die. So we all choose suicide in effect. I suspect that we probably do have exit points. I've seen things in the research that I've done that make me feel that potentially we do. I believe that, well, actually, this was a question I had for you, was whether you think that we can die before our time's up. Are we here with a set amount of time? Can we die before we've completed our mission or our purpose or whatever the reason that we're here for? Because I feel like life is so fragile. And then on the other hand, it's so sturdy and quite hard. It's a like polarity type thing where it feels fragile, and it can go in an instant. But on the other hand, our bodies can endure so much and our spirit can endure so much. So I'm hesitant to say I believe a set thing. My ideas evolve quite a lot as I go through and learn and talk to more people, but I just love all of the different perspectives and I love different ideas and I love it when I'm challenged. And your conversation with me today has just challenged me so much, which I think is great. And I think we should always ask questions and always keep learning. So, yeah, thank you for asking me. Do you think that we can die before our time?
No, I don't.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I subscribe to. Explaining that and trying to understand that is a little bit different, but I feel that we come here for a set time, for a set purpose, and that we can't leave before then. So
My perspective on that, Kirsty, would be that we can decide things like that in an instant.
oh,
One of my
sure. Yeah.
one of my best friend's husbands, her husband, was suffering with cancer. And I scan the guy every day. He was not in the 12 phases of transition. He just was not.
Yeah.
And he was having trouble walking. And he collapsed, and then he needed help getting back up. And that was at maybe 8 o'clock at night. And he died at 5 o'clock the next morning in bed. He just was not interested in being, when I talked to him afterwards, when I talked to his spirit, when she called me to tell me that he'd passed, I said, what? And so, of course, I got his spirit on the line, and I was, in my head on the line, and my psychic friends network line. And I said, his name was Bruce. And I said, Bruce, what happened? What did he said? I just was not going to do that. I didn't want my family to go through that. I didn't want my wife to go through that. I just was not interested. So I just decided to go. My late sister, who died 11 years ago, very unexpectedly, her husband died last fall, very unexpectedly. And very similar situation, collapsed on a vent in the hospital, took him off life support. He died. So the morning after he died, I woke up and my head was facing to the right on the pillow as I was laying in bed, and I woke up and there's a couch in our bedroom, in our master bedroom. And my sister and her husband were sitting on the couch holding hands, giggling. And I said, what are you guys doing? What was going on? And he told me I said, what happened? And of course, he told me what was the thing that took him out. And he just said, I was done. I had done everything I wanted to do. I was ready to go be with Joan, my sister. And he said, here I am. Yeah. So it's really interesting. The other thing is it's always joyful. You're surrounded by angels. You're surrounded by deceased loved ones.
How cool is that?
I mean, there's no, my dad said, well, how do you know? I said, I've never seen angels drop somebody into a fiery pit, ever.
Yeah.
And I know people that have had near-death experiences that see things that they perceive as being scary. That's based on their perspective, based on their frame of reference. May I give you an example of that?
Yes, please.
A gargoyle. You know what a gargoyle is?
Yeah.
On a building. We see a gargoyle and we think, oh, creepy, scary, on the buildings, right? To keep the evil spirits away. Well, back to the indigenous cultures, you show somebody in an indigenous culture that hasn't ever seen a gargoyle before, you show them a picture of a gargoyle, they're not going to be afraid of it. They're going to say, oh, what's that? Looks like a different kind of dog. What kind of dog is that? again, it comes into our frame of reference. Back to the dreams. We have things sometimes that we experience in dreams that are scary. It's how we're interpreting that information based on our frame of reference. So I think that's important to remember, because spirit is pure love and pure joy. And that's what Pope Clement has basically commanded me to do. I argue with him on things, but he's just, yeah, we have very robust discussions. And he's always right, but I'm gonna debate him on things if it makes sense to me.
Oh, definitely. And that's how we learn, isn't it? We have these discussions.
Exactly.
I love it. I think it's great. Julie, thank you so much. I feel, yeah, like I said earlier, I feel like I've learnt so much and I feel like I want to go away and learn other things. The 12 phases of transition, your belief is that everybody goes through them and
Yes.
that they can be long and drawn out. They can be very fast. So for an example, in an accident, those 12 phases, I'm back to thinking about the goldfish in the bag. And I thought, well, maybe an accident is where, rather than having leaking holes where the water's spraying out, the accident is getting the scissors and just cutting it off. So whatever's holding the bag, that bag's going to drop. Suddenly life source is gone. The 12 phases are still going to happen in those micro moments.
Yep. Nanoseconds. Remember, time doesn't exist in the spirit world.
Well,
So a second in our reality isn't even a thing in the spirit world. It's not even a blip on the radar screen.
Yeah.
Which again is hard for us to wrap our human minds around.
Oh, totally.
We don't have a frame of reference. You just kind of, I feel like those dogs that go, oh, what?
Oh, that's my life.
I know. But that's why you're so brilliant, because you're so inquisitive and you're being led to learn this stuff, as am I, as are all of us being led to learn things that expand our spirit. And then as our spirit expands, new thoughts come in, which create new thoughts in the collective for all spirit, right? Both attached to a body and isn't. And then I'm getting real woo-woo on you here. And that's how we expand as a human race. Because when we discover something, it contributes to somebody else discovering it, or perhaps the next phase of whatever it is we're discovering. I'm an inventor. That's how it works. You have a thought, you figure out how to turn it into a product. And then the hard part comes, because then you got to figure out how to sell it.
Yeah.
How to get people to buy it. I always say inventions are no good if you can't sell them.
Yeah.
Who cares?
It's true. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, Julie Ryan. This has just been absolutely fantastic. What do you
welcome.
think?
I have a present for your listeners.
Yes. We'll pop the link for this into the show notes as well. The beautiful book, Angelic Attendants. The subtitle is What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next. We've got couple of other books there.
Angel messages for dogs, angel messages for cats, and angel messages for kids that are children's books that are darling. They're beautifully illustrated, and they talk about animals, and then we sneak in there a little bit. Oh, you're a spirit attached to a body. So is your cat, and if your cat dies, you can still talk to your cat. Here's how, kind of a thing. And anybody that wants a copy of that book, I'm delighted to send you a free copy. All you have to do is just go to AskJulieRyan.com, click on the Ask Julie button, say, hey, I heard you on Kirsty's show. I'd love a copy of your book, and we'll send you a free digital and audiobook download. So just all you have to do is ask. And if you have children and grandchildren, just say, hey, I've got little kids, or I have grandchildren. I'd love a copy of your dog book or your cat book or your kid book or whatever, and we'll send that to you as well. It's just as a gift for listening.
Thank you so much. I think it's more than a gift, because I think these stories need to get out there, and children, we need to teach them that it's not all doom and gloom. This is my personal belief. And I think just raising that conversation is amazing. So thank you so much, listeners. I encourage you to go get the books. The link is in the show notes. So just go down below. The link will be there. And also check out Julie's site, askjulieryan.com. She does amazing Q&A in there. I went and got a little bit lost in there for a while, reading all of these blog posts and the Q&A, and it's just fascinating. So I do encourage you to go over there. Julie Ryan, thank you so, so much. This has been amazing. And yes, thank you very much for your time. I look forward. I think we probably need to have another conversation about some of the other work that you're doing, because that's equally as fascinating. But thank you for your time today and for joining me on the podcast.